"You're infertile, Naomi. You're nothing to me. Get out of my house." The words cut through the silence like a knife through glass. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. Her thin fingers gripped the handle of an old suitcase as she dragged it down the hall where wedding photos still hung. Outside, the rain swallowed her whole. Each drop on her skin felt like a reminder she'd been replaced, erased, declared useless. The woman who once filled that house with warmth now stood alone under the storm, watching the lights fade behind her. But somewhere between one breath and the next, her pain hardened into promise. She whispered to the night, "You'll regret this." From that moment, she vowed no tear of hers would ever fall for him again. They called her infertile, cursed, broken, yet one day, the truth would stand tall beside her, and he would have to look it in the eye. Before we dive into this story, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Maybe it's raining where you are too. Go on, grab a cup of tea or coffee, find a soft spot to relax, and let this one sink in. This story will hurt, then heal. If you're ready for that kind of ride, hit subscribe. Let's begin. You're infertile, Naomi. You're nothing to me. Get out of my house. 1. The words that once shattered her world now echoed inside her head, as the heavy oak doors of the Houston Riverside Grand Ballroom swung open. Light poured in, scattering gold across the marble floor. For a moment, the orchestra faltered, the chatter dimmed, and every pair of eyes turned toward the entrance. There she was, Naomi Ellison, dressed in a yellow gown that shimmered softly under the chandeliers, the color of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her hair framed her face with quiet dignity. At each side of her, a small boy clung to her hand, and another trailed close behind. 3 pairs of small polished shoes tapped against the marble in rhythm with her heels. A whisper slipped through the crowd like a spark. "That's his ex-wife." The music died completely. A cameraman froze mid-pan. Even the air seemed to tighten. At the altar, Chase Morgan, the groom, the man who once sent her into the night, stared as though he had seen a ghost rise from the ruins of his own making. His hand holding the microphone trembled. The bride beside him, Adora Lennox, blinked in confusion, her painted smile faltering as she followed everyone's gaze toward the door. Naomi didn't rush. Each step was slow, deliberate, balanced between pain and peace. Her face betrayed nothing, no anger, no triumph, only a calmness that seemed too steady for the chaos she'd walked into. The boys kept close, clutching her fingers. One of them, the youngest, looked up at her and whispered softly, "Mommy, is that him?" She gave a small nod, her eyes never leaving Chase. Her heels clicked against the marble. Each sound landed sharp in the silence. Every heartbeat in that room followed her like a verdict waiting to be read. She reached the front row and sat in the exact seat Chase had ordered to be reserved for her when he thought she would come to watch and weep. But she didn't bow her head. She simply folded her hands over her lap, smoothing the yellow silk. The 3 boys sat beside her, identical eyes wide, unaware of the storm they had just walked into. From the stage, Chase's pulse hammered. 7 years. 7 years since he'd thrown her out, certain she would fade away. 7 years since he'd called her barren. And now, there she sat, a living contradiction to every cruel word. In the glass wall behind him, the reflection showed his bride, his guests, his past, and the woman who had once carried his hope. Naomi's gaze lifted, steady, unflinching. For a brief second, his mind flashed back to the last time he'd seen that look, the night he'd ended their marriage. Back then, he'd called it defiance. Now, he understood it was something far stronger. The MC's voice cracked through the microphone, trying to reclaim the moment. "Shall we begin the ceremony?" But Chase didn't move. His eyes were locked on the 3 boys. His throat dried, his body stiff. Around them, 1,000 breaths held in suspense. The bride shifted uneasily, sensing the collapse of something she couldn't yet name. And in that stillness between shame, recognition, and disbelief, something ancient began to stir again. The whispers, the memories, the truth. In that silence, every secret of 7 years began to breathe again. Rain lashed against the tall windows of their River Oaks mansion. The clock read 11 p.m., and the house glowed with a dim, exhausted kind of light. Chase Morgan loosened his tie and poured another drink. The air smelled of whiskey and silence. Naomi sat in the living room, hands folded on her lap. On the coffee table lay a stack of prescriptions from her fertility doctor. Her face was pale but calm. "I cooked dinner," she said quietly, her voice searching for normal. "Don't start tonight, Naomi," he muttered without looking at her. "There's no tonight or tomorrow, Chase. We barely speak anymore. He turned toward her then, eyes red from drink and sleeplessness. 7 years, he said, his tone flat, deadly. 7 years and not one child. Do you want me to die without an heir? Naomi blinked away the sting behind her eyes. You can't time a blessing, she whispered. The glass hit the table, shattering. Whiskey spread across the polished wood, gleaming like spilled gold. Don't preach to me about blessings. My mother calls every week asking why her son has no child. People laugh behind my back. They say you've made me less of a man. Naomi's hands trembled. Then tell them the truth that we've tried, that it hurts me too. He laughed bitterly. Hurts you? You have no idea what it means for a man to have no legacy. His phone buzzed on the counter. He snatched it up. His mother's name glowed on the screen. Without hesitation, he put it on speaker. Chase, her voice crackled, sharp as broken glass. Tell that woman to leave my son alone. She's cursed your name long enough. Naomi's throat closed. She stared at the phone, her voice barely a breath. Mrs. Morgan, please. The older woman's words sliced through her plea. If she truly loved you, she'd set you free. The call ended. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. Naomi picked up their wedding photo from the table, her smile frozen beside his younger, prouder face. I've stood by you through everything, she said softly. Through debt, through sleepless nights, through building this empire from nothing. And now you measure me by a womb? Tomorrow, he interrupted coldly, I'll speak to my lawyer. Her legs buckled. She sank to the floor, clutching the hem of his trousers. Please, Chase. Give us time. We can see another doctor. He looked down at her the way a man might look at something once beautiful but now useless. Mercy, the narrator's voice whispered in his absence, was something only rich men could afford. He stepped away, took his phone, and dialed. Prepare the divorce papers, he said into the receiver. Eyes fixed on the Rain Street window. Naomi froze. Behind him, from the office printer, came the faint mechanical hum of paper being fed, an eerie echo of her life being processed out of his. Her eyes drifted to the wastebasket near his desk. A crumpled page peeked out. The results from her hormone test, the one the doctor had given him. She reached for it with trembling fingers and unfolded the sheet. Her heart stopped. Normal. Perfectly normal. He hadn't even read it. He'd already decided who to blame. She rose slowly, numb. In their bedroom, the air smelled like cedar and perfume, hers, fading. She opened the wardrobe, pulled down a small suitcase, and began folding her clothes. Her wedding dress still hung behind the door, swaying gently like a ghost. Chase stood in the hall, watching her. Leave the keys, he said. She turned once, her voice barely steady. One day, you'll see what you've thrown away. He didn't answer. The door clicked shut behind her. To him, it sounded like silence. But it was history, beginning again. Outside, the rain beat harder. Naomi walked through the sleeping neighborhood, her suitcase wheels hissing against the wet pavement. Streetlights reflected on puddles like fractured stars. She didn't know where she was going, only that leaving was the one thing left that still belonged to her. The rain hadn't stopped. It followed her down every street, past shuttered stores and sleeping houses, as if the sky refused to let her grief go unnoticed. Naomi's thin frame shivered beneath her soaked dress. Mud streaked the hem. Her hair clung to her face, and her suitcase felt heavier with each step. She turned into a smaller neighborhood, older, humbler, the kind where laughter came from open windows and people still knew each other's names. A warm glow flickered behind a curtain on the ground floor. She knew that window. Amara, her closest friend from college, the one she hadn't seen in months, maybe years. Naomi hesitated, hand hovering before the door. The rain slid down her wrist and pooled at her fingertips. She knocked twice, soft, then once more. The door opened a crack, light spilling out onto the wet porch. Naomi? Amara's voice was disbelief wrapped in concern. My God, what happened to you? Naomi tried to speak, but the words dissolved into sobs. Amara pulled her inside without waiting for an answer. The scent of ginger soup filled the air, sharp and comforting. Naomi stood in the narrow hallway, dripping rainwater onto the tile. He's done, she whispered. I'm gone. Amara didn't ask for details. She wrapped a blanket around Naomi's shoulders and guided her to the small sofa. Naomi's body gave in, trembling as she Saturday. Her breath came uneven, and for the first time since walking out that door, she allowed herself to collapse. In the warmth of her friend's home, she let the tears fall freely. The night was quiet except for the bubbling pot in the kitchen and the wind tapping on the window. Naomi watched it all as if through glass, two worlds separated by something invisible. Her voice barely reached the air. I had nowhere else to go. Amara knelt beside her. Then this is where you'll stay. By morning, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Naomi woke to the smell of fried eggs and coffee. Amara smiled from the kitchen. You can take the spare room. It's not much, but it's warm. Naomi nodded, eyes swollen but grateful. She carried her damp suitcase into the small room, where a single window opened to the gray sky. She sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the fogged glass with her finger, watching drops race each other down. Each one felt like a year lost, 7 years falling, never touching the ground. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant. Please, don't tell anyone I'm here. Amara turned from the stove. Not even your family? Naomi shook her head. They'd only look at me like I failed. Later that afternoon, as they shared soup at the small dining table, Amara mentioned something she'd overheard in the market. People are talking. They think Chase has someone else. Naomi's spoon paused midair. She gave a faint, broken smile. I wish that were true. At least then the failure would make sense. Amara reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You didn't fail. The words hung there, kind and useless. Naomi stared at her reflection in the soup, blurry, hollow. He said it was me. He never even questioned it. Amara leaned back, thinking, Did you ever get tested? Properly tested, I mean? Naomi frowned. No. He said there was no need. He told me he was fine. Still, Amara said softly, you should know. Sometimes what we call love is just someone's fear of being ashamed. Naomi didn't respond, but the sentence struck somewhere deep, like a quiet bell. That night she couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain returned, gentler now, like a memory that refused to fade. She walked to the window and looked out. The streets were washed clean. The next morning, Amara entered the room with 2 cups of tea. There's a clinic I trust, she said, setting one down. A friend works there. They can run every test discreetly. Naomi stared into the steam rising from the cup. And what if it's true? What if I'm broken? Then you'll face it, Amara said. And if it isn't, you'll know you were never the problem. Naomi turned to the window. Sunlight slipped through the gray, spreading across the wall like a soft hand reaching for her. For the first time in days, she didn't feel invisible. She nodded slowly. Tomorrow, then. That night, she lay awake in the small bed, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the dripping faucet, the fragile peace between storms. The rain had finally stopped, but the sound of it lingered in her chest, steady, uncertain, alive. She closed her eyes, unaware that within days, the weight of 7 years of guilt would begin to shift, and everything she'd believed about herself would turn upside down. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper. Naomi sat beside Amara in the waiting room, her hands clenched around a clipboard. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Around her, women with round bellies smiled as they left holding small envelopes of ultrasound photos. Naomi stared at the wall, trying not to imagine herself among them. Her handwriting wobbled across the medical form. Are you all right? Amara asked gently. Naomi nodded, though her throat was dry. I just want it over with. When the nurse called her name, her pulse quickened. Inside the exam room, the walls were pale green, the air sterile. Dr. Uche entered with a polite smile. Good morning, Miss Ellison. Tell me, have you ever been diagnosed with any fertility issues? Naomi hesitated. No. My husband said I didn't need to be tested. He said, the problem wasn't his. Duff, real. The doctor's expression softened, though his eyes flickered with quiet disapproval. We'll do a full workup, he said simply. Let's make sure you have answers. Blood drawn. Ultrasound. Questions she barely heard. When it was over, she felt lighter and heavier all at once. You'll have your results in 2 days, the doctor told her. 2 days. They stretched like a lifetime. Naomi spent them in Amara's kitchen, chopping vegetables without tasting food, watching sunlight move across the wall as if marking time. The world seemed both too bright and too far away. Each night she lay in bed replaying his voice. You're a curse. On the second morning she woke early. The window was open, and the air smelled new. The rain was gone. The city felt clean again. Maybe that was a sign. She dressed quietly, hands steady for the first time in weeks. At the clinic, Dr. Uche greeted her with a small nod. His voice was calm, almost reverent. Your results are here, Miss Ellison. Everything looks perfectly healthy. Your reproductive system is normal, hormones balanced, scans clear. There's no medical reason you couldn't conceive. Naomi blinked. "There's nothing wrong?" "Nothing at all," he said. "If there were difficulties in your marriage, I'd advise your former husband to get evaluated as well." Her breath caught. For a moment she sat frozen, then a short, stunned laugh escaped her. It sounded strange, like something breaking and mending at once. Tears blurred the doctor's face. "You mean it?" she asked. He smiled gently. "Yes, you're healthy." Outside, sunlight poured across the parking lot. Naomi sat on a bench under a tree, the paper still in her hand. Amara joined her, eyes searching. "Well?" Naomi turned toward her, tears glinting on her cheeks. "I'm fine, perfectly fine." Amara's face broke into a grin. "You see? You're not the broken one." Naomi laughed through her sobs, pressing the results to her chest. "I blamed myself for so long," she whispered. 7 years of shame for nothing. He called me barren, but he never looked in the mirror. They sat there a long time, two women and a truth that felt like sunlight after endless rain. Naomi's tears weren't of sorrow now, they were the kind that cleanse. "I prayed for an answer," she said finally. "God gave it to me, just later than I hoped." As they left the clinic, Naomi noticed a man in the parking lot helping his young daughter tie her shoe. The girl giggled, clinging to his hand. Something about the tenderness of that moment caught in Naomi's chest, a glimpse of what love was supposed to look like. She smiled faintly. In the laughter of that child, Naomi heard something 7 years of marriage had never given her faith. 2 years after the clinic, the mornings began to make sense again. Naomi woke before the buses groaned to life, before the street vendors rolled up their tarps, before the sun decided what kind of day it would be. In Amara's small kitchen, she wiped the counters with slow, careful strokes, measuring rice by memory, toasting spices until the air turned warm and friendly. After 7 years of speaking in apologies, the first place she heard her own voice clearly was a simmering pot. The lid rattled. Steam lifted. Something inside her answered back. They pushed the cart 2 blocks to the corner by a squat office building, the sign hand-painted and a little crooked. The neighborhood woke around them. A child tugging a backpack that was clearly too big, a woman jogging past with headphones and a stubborn ponytail, the number 53 bus sighing to a stop as if tired of making the same promises. Naomi plated eggs and spooned jollof into clamshell containers, her motions unhurried, precise. She didn't oversell. She offered what she had. People noticed. By the 3rd week, regulars began to learn her name. The security guard from the credit union asked for extra pepper and handed over a story about his mother's garden. A receptionist from the 2nd floor swore the rice tasted like a song she used to hear in her grandmother's kitchen. Amara teased under her breath. "Any man who eats your food wouldn't dare leave." And Naomi, surprised by the sound, laughed. It felt unfamiliar and immediate, like sunlight slipping under a door that had been stuck for years. On a Tuesday, a man in a gray work shirt crossed from the building next door, pausing as if gauging whether he should take up space. He was not handsome in the way magazines insist, but his face carried the quiet competence of someone who fixes what other people break. Emmett Cole. He read the handwritten menu twice and ordered once. "If it tastes as good as it smells, I'll be back tomorrow," he said. He meant it. He came back the next day and the next, sometimes with a loose screw in his pocket, sometimes with a story about a stubborn elevator or a tenant who swore light bulbs had moods. He didn't flirt. He listened. He laughed in a way that made other people relax. Between the scent of oil and onions, he carried the clean smell of cut lumber, and his voice had a patient, level quality that made even small sentences feel reliable. Naomi felt something move in her chest, a tiny reflex she refused to name. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. When their fingers brushed over a container lid, she pretended not to notice the small current that leapt skin to skin. That night she told herself it was the heat of the kitchen, nothing more. Work steadied her like a hand at her back. She slept deeper. She started to taste food again, not just chew it. Sometimes, late at night, the doctor's sentence returned like a blessing spoken over her pillow. "You're healthy." She had repeated the words at first to test their edges, then to own them, then to let them go. Health, she realized, was not only numbers on a printout. It was deciding not to hold her breath while walking past the mirror. It was setting a plate for herself and eating without apology. One evening, the city cooled after a hot day. Naomi and Amara counted their earnings at the small table, a fan tick-ticking from the corner as if keeping testimony. "Do you think God was ever silent?" Naomi asked, not lifting her eyes. "Maybe not," Amara said. "Maybe we were just too loud in our hurt to hear him." The answer landed gently, like a folded towel placed where you'll need it in the morning. The stand did well enough that they considered adding a chalkboard special. Emmett arrived the next day with a worn canvas bag and set it on the counter. "For you," he said. Naomi frowned. "We can't accept." "Consider it an investment," he cut in, a shy smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. Inside were bags of rice, good stock, fresh tomatoes, from a guy who's selfish about his breakfast. She laughed and didn't disguise the gratitude. The world tilted a degree toward kind. That night, alone by the window of the spare room, she watched the last stripe of daylight dissolve along the rooftops. In the glass she could see her face, thinner but steadier, and the room behind her small, borrowed, safe. The city hummed. Somewhere a dog barked. She held the clinic results once, folded them again, then slid them back into the drawer without the usual ceremony. She didn't need proof to sleep. Morning returned like it always does. The hiss of oil, the scrape of metal on metal, the first footfalls of a customer who had decided to trust them with the beginning of his day. When Emmett stopped again, he paid and then stayed to fix a loose hinge, asking nothing in return. Naomi didn't flinch from the kindness. She portioned another serving, wiped the counter clean, and felt the shape of her life take one careful step forward. Maybe happiness doesn't knock. Maybe it keeps walking back to the same corner every morning until you finally look up and recognize it. As the bus doors folded open and a wave of new faces spilled toward the cart, Naomi smoothed her apron, lifted the lid, and let the steam announce what her heart had been practicing. "I am still here. I am not finished. And this, right now, is enough." Another year passed. The cart had become a narrow storefront, with a bell that trilled when the door opened and a window that caught the best of the morning. The sign no longer leaned. It shone. Naomi learned the rhythm of rushes and lulls, of stockpots and receipts, of a life that, for once, did not need defending. Emmett kept showing up with tools and small, precise favors. A bracket that made a shelf honest, paint that turned the walls from tired to hopeful, a hand-cut frame for their menu so letters didn't look so temporary. On a brutal afternoon, the power blinked and died. The refrigerators sighed into silence, the fan hiccuped, and the small room immediately began to gather heat. Naomi stood in the dimmed doorway, hands empty for the first time all day. Before she could panic, a figure crossed the threshold carrying a beat-up toolbox and a coil of wire. "Stay with me," Emmett said lightly, crouching by the breaker. He worked without drama, testing, tightening, listening for the telltale click that would return the world to order. The lights sprang back. They didn't blaze. They settled warm, even, forgiving. Naomi's breath left her chest like a secret she no longer needed to keep. For 7 years, she had lived by other people's switches. Now someone had restored light simply to help her stand in her place. She thanked him and meant all of it. He lingered after closing. "Coffee?" he asked. They walked 2 doors down, sat by the window, and let the city move around them without demanding they hurry. He told her that he'd married young, that the woman he loved died on a wet road one spring. He did not try to dress the grief in lessons. He named it and then fell quiet. Naomi didn't offer details about Chase. The facts were already too loud in the world. But her eyes answered him. "I don't need rescuing," she said, tracing the rim of her cup. "I'm just afraid I've forgotten how to trust." "Then start small," he replied. "Trust that I'll be here tomorrow, ordering the same thing and pretending it's different." She smiled because he was impossible to argue with, and because he made faith feel like a habit, not a cliff. 3 days later, he didn't come. Morning turned afternoon, and she told herself stories about overtime, about traffic, about anything that didn't end in abandonment. By the second day, his absence became a bruise she kept bumping into. On the third, he pushed through the door with an apologetic wince and a bandage on his forearm. "New ladder," he said. "Old lesson." The joke was small and sufficient. Naomi didn't know she was crying until he reached for a towel and held it out like a truce. She let herself be angry for an hour, then let it go because the anger wasn't about him. When they locked up that night, he took the trash bag from her hand even though it wasn't heavy. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said. She didn't argue. Weeks slid into a new season. They replaced the bell with one that chimed less like a question and more like a welcome. Emmett learned which pan sang the right note when hot, and how Naomi liked the cutting boards stacked. On a slow evening, they sat on milk crates out back, the alley smelling faintly of rain and soap. "You've taught me how to believe in quiet," he told her. "I didn't know that was a skill. And you've taught me that quiet can come from someone other than myself," she said. Their fingers found each other without cleverness. It felt like choosing to stand rather than trying to fly. Then the body that had only given her bad news began to speak in a new language. At first it was fatigue she couldn't blame on Dawn's. Then the sour flip of her stomach at the smell of onions that had never betrayed her. Amara noticed before Naomi said the words. She pressed a test into Naomi's hand and waited outside the door, humming a hymn she usually reserved for funerals. Naomi stared at the line appearing where there had never been any lines and tried to make peace with miracles that arrived without rehearsal. At the clinic, the nurse's shoes squeaked softly down the hall. The exam room ticked. The doctor turned the screen toward her, the grainy world suddenly intimate. "Congratulations," he said, and the syllables moved through the air with the weight of an answered prayer. She didn't say anything at first. She reached for Emmett's hand and found it steady, calloused, warm. Tears blurred the monitor. She laughed just to keep breathing. In the parking lot, she stood very still, as if the earth might shift under her if she walked too fast. 7 years of being called a curse, scattered like birds, startled from a wire. The word that had stalked her lost its teeth in the light. That night, Emmett knelt in the tiny kitchen, not with a ring or a speech, but with the reverence of a man at a doorway he knows is holy. "We'll do it right," he said into her hands. "Slow if we must, careful when we should, brave when we're called." Outside, the city exhaled. Inside, Naomi pressed her palm to her abdomen, where future had quietly taken root. She could not yet name what was coming, only that the room felt bigger than its walls. After 7 years of being branded infertile, she heard the first sure rhythm that didn't ask permission to exist, her child's heartbeat, small and absolute, knocking on the door of her life like light. The maternity wing smelled like lemon cleaner and warm cotton. Naomi sat with her hands over her belly while Emmett traced circles on the back of her knuckles, steady as a metronome. Outside the door, laughter rose and fell as new parents compared due dates, names, cravings. She smiled at a poster of a cartoon moon rocking a baby and said, half teasing, half prayer, "I think it's just one. One is enough to replace the whole universe," Emmett answered. "And if it's two, I'll learn to be a planet with better gravity." He didn't know the universe was about to expand. Dr. Uche dimmed the lights and rolled the wand through gel that cooled Naomi's skin. On the screen, white flecks pulsed like stars forming. The doctor frowned in concentration. Then his mouth curved. "Well now," he murmured, tapping the speaker. The room filled with a soft thudding, small and defiant. He shifted the wand, turned a dial. Another thudding. He adjusted again and glanced at them with a spark in his eyes. "I'm hearing 3 heartbeats." Naomi blinked, certain she'd misheard. Emmett sat forward so fast his chair squeaked. 3? "Congratulations," the doctor said, laughter tucked in his voice. "Triplets, all measuring strong." The air left Naomi's body and returned as tears. She didn't sob. It was quieter than that, like a dam releasing water with reverence. Emmett pressed his forehead to her shoulder, breath catching on a sound he tried to swallow and couldn't. The monitor kept singing the most stubborn rhythm in the world. 3 heartbeats, each one an affidavit against 7 years of accusation. She thought of every night she had curled around emptiness and called it fate. She thought of the word that had followed her like a shadow until this very second. Useless, curse, barren. The syllables fell apart in the dark and dissolved into that music. Amara arrived as if the news had dialed her number. She crashed through the door without apology and wrapped them both up. 3, she said, as if testing the word for weight. 3 boys, 3 girls, or some genius combination, who cares? Then softer, into Naomi's hair. "You see, you were never what they named you." Emmett kept staring at the screen as though he could memorize the pattern and become it. "This isn't payback," he said, voice rough. "This is God giving what nobody else could." Naomi smiled through tears. "Not paying back, giving beyond." She placed her palm over the thrum on the speaker. "I'm not getting anything back. I'm getting something I never had." That night, when the apartment was quiet and the city ran on the soft wheels of midnight, Naomi sat at the small table with a cold glass of milk and her journal. She dated the page and wrote carefully, as if the ink might bruise, "If he ever sees me again, he will understand who he misjudged." She closed the book and pressed it to her chest, not as a weapon, but as a witness. Across town, a different camera flashed. On a rooftop draped in string lights, Chase stood beside Adora while a photographer arranged their hands on the railing. Her ring threw sparks whenever she moved. His smile landed just short of his eyes. His mother adjusted his collar and whispered, "Don't repeat a mistake. Marry well. Marry a woman who can give you a future." He nodded, felt the old script slide back over him like a jacket that had never fit. Later, when the photographer asked for a look of pure hope, Adora tilted her head toward him and searched his face. "You trust me?" she asked lightly. "Of course," he said. "I'm just trying not to be afraid." She laughed, but not for long. She had been counting days without telling him. The calendar on her phone refused to reward precision. Naomi learned new rituals. She walked slower. She ate when food didn't appeal and slept when sleep felt optional. In the evenings, she let Amara scold her into putting her feet up while Emmett argued with the crib manual like it was written in a dead language. They chose names they didn't share, and colors that weren't pink or blue, just soft and honest. Sometimes fear brushed her shoulder. What if the miracle asked more of her than she had? Then the sound returned to her memory, 1, 2, 3, and steadied her like a hand she trusted in a crowded room. On a Sunday, the city's light thinned to honey. Naomi sat by the window with her shirt lifted slightly, watching the gentle rise and fall of her stomach. Emmett placed his ear there as if listening for a secret, then lifted his head and smiled. "They already have opinions," he said. "I can tell. And you plan to negotiate with all three?" "I plan to lose on purpose," he admitted. Somewhere in a darkened office, Chase opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Beneath contracts and cufflinks lay a wedding photo from a life he'd converted to ash. He slid the frame out and stared at the frozen joy, at his own certainty. His hand trembled, absurdly, like a man holding a photograph of himself at a crime scene he still insisted wasn't his fault. One woman listened to 3 lives thrum inside her, blessing stacked upon blessing until meaning spilled over the edges. One man listened to a quieter sound, the kind that doesn't need a speaker, the thin, unavoidable breath of regret. The city held both at once as evening settled. Naomi smoothed her palm over the echoing music and whispered, "Grow," and the apartment felt larger. Chase stared into the proof he had once refused and couldn't set it down. He closed the drawer, but the past didn't close with it. The night took a breath for them both and waited. Afternoon light lay across the living room like a warm shawl. 3 bassinets stood side by side, their small inhabitants rising and falling in uncoordinated sleep. Amara had claimed the armchair with the squeaky spring. Emmett sat on the floor reading the paper, his back against the couch, his foot nudging a rattle to keep it from rolling under furniture. Peace had a shape now. 2 mugs leaving rings on coasters, the slow chorus of infant breathing, and a silence that felt full instead of empty. Naomi brushed a thumb along the edge of a tiny ear and thought, "Nothing can touch us anymore." She believed it in the way you believe in gravity, until the door knocked. The mailman stood framed in the hallway with a padded envelope and a face that said he delivered good and bad indiscriminately. "For Miss Ellison," he said, and placed the parcel in her hands. It was heavy for mail and heavier for memory cream paper, gold edges, the kind of expense that announces itself. Amara slid it open with a fingernail and read, then stopped. "Naomi," she whispered. She turned the card so the calligraphy faced the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Chase Morgan cordially invite you." The light in the apartment changed without moving. Naomi set the invitation on the table, as if it might bruise the wood. A laugh escaped her, small, incredulous, cut short. In her head, a sentence from another lifetime played back. "You are barren." She glanced at the bassinets and almost said it out loud to prove how wrong it sounded. Emmett watched her face, folded the paper quietly, and shifted onto the couch. "You don't have to go," he said, not as an order or a rescue, but as a door left open. "It isn't revenge," she answered. "I don't want to stand there and watch anything fall apart." She took a breath. "I just don't want to be afraid of my own shadow anymore." "I'll drive," he said, because some sentences should never have to be spoken alone. Amara leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Then we do this properly," she decided, practical as ever. Not loud, clear. The next day she lifted a dress from a garment bag, yellow, simple, honest in its shine. "Don't stand out because you're beautiful," she said, pinning the hem. "Stand out because you're at peace." Naomi stepped into the fabric and watched a woman appear in the mirror who looked like someone she would have liked to meet years ago. They booked a car not because they needed to be noticed, but because they needed to arrive unflustered. The driver would be on time. The doors would open easily. There would be nothing for fate to trip over. Naomi rehearsed nothing. She didn't script her face or her silence. She kissed 3 foreheads that smelled like milk and sleep, and whispered, "One day you'll know what this costs and why it's worth it." In another part of the city, Adora arranged centerpieces while vendors texted her spreadsheets. She snapped a photo of the ballroom for her followers and captioned it with a promise she hoped to inhabit. Chase stood beneath a chandelier answering questions about seating charts with the precision he reserved for meetings that moved money. When the planner asked if there were any special guests to note, he paused. "Just make sure the front row is clear," he said. His friend raised an eyebrow. "For who?" Chase didn't answer. A memory in a yellow frame flickered across his mind and vanished before it could show him what it was. Evening came on like a tide. Naomi fed the babies and changed them into clean onesies patterned with small crowns she pretended not to notice. Amara tucked a compact into Naomi's clutch and said, "You won't need it. Bring it anyway." Emmett checked the car confirmation and tossed the keys from hand to hand, like a man rehearsing steadiness. No one spoke about the old house or the old words. They spoke about timing, traffic, who would carry which diaper bag. It made the moment ordinary enough to hold. Dawn was pale when the car slid to the curb outside. Gloss black, quiet engine, an interior that smelled faintly of leather and something colder like a decision. Emmett opened the rear door and Naomi gathered the skirts of the yellow dress, moving with the calm of someone who has already survived the worst night of her life. 3 car seats lined the back, and 3 small faces blinked at the newness. She took 2 small hands. Amara buckled the third. The driver glanced in the mirror, startled and then composed. People make their own miracles and expect you to treat them like schedules. The city lifted into morning as they drove glass buildings catching first light, pedestrians drawing jackets closer to their throats, a couple arguing softly at a crosswalk and laughing before the signals changed. Naomi watched it pass and did not think of apologies or proof. She thought only of arrival. Not arrival at a place, but at a self. Not every battle needs a sword. Some only require that you show up and let the truth stand beside you without decoration. When the venue finally rose ahead, all columns and shine, the driver eased to a stop. Naomi tightened her grip on 3 small fingers, and the yellow fabric whispered against the leather seat. The door was already being opened from the outside, and when the wedding doors swung wide, no one in that room yet understood they were about to witness what happens when a lie runs out of breath in front of a louder miracle. The ballroom gleamed like a promise kept. Cameras blinked from their perches, catching the flare of chandeliers and the soft theater of wealth-white roses, mirrored aisles, a choir rehearsing joy on cue. Chase stood at the top of the dais in a white agbada edged with gold, his smile polished, his pulse rehearsed into obedience. At last, he told his reflection in a beveled column, everything is finally where it belongs. He did not know that, outside, destiny had just eased to the curb and cut the engine. The doors opened, and a draft of morning slipped across the marble. Conversations thinned to threads. Heads turned without being told. The black car waited at the steps as if it belonged to the building, and from it stepped Naomi in a yellow dress the color of kept vows. Light found her, and stayed. At her sides, 2 small boys held her hands. A third kept pace with the half-proud, half-wobbly seriousness of the very young. The room pivoted toward them. A whisper broke and multiplied. "That's his ex-wife. She has children." 3. Screens meant to magnify Adora's entrance instead framed Naomi's face, composed but not cold, and 3 small profiles that echoed one another like notes in a chord. Up on the stage, Chase's breath clipped. His mother's knuckles whitened around a fan. Her mouth forgot how to close. Adora's brows gathered. The choir fell silent without instruction. The band waited with their first triumphant note caught mid-air, embarrassed to be heard. Naomi did not perform humility or victory. She walked. Her heels touched the floor and announced nothing more than presence. She took the front row seat reserved by a man who had imagined her smaller than this moment. The boys settled beside her, their shoes swinging, their patience negotiating with curiosity. Chase left the safe middle of the stage and descended 2 steps he couldn't remember taking. He did not come closer. 7 years traveled between them and condensed into one look that contained a night of rain, a suitcase, a signature he hadn't read, and a sentence he had believed long enough to become. Adora leaned toward a guest at the aisle. "Who is she?" "The ex-wife," the guest replied, unable to make it sound like a rumor rather than a fact. Adora turned to Chase and kept her voice steady the way a blade is steady. "You told me she couldn't have children." M6. Chase opened his mouth, found no words, and closed it just in time to watch Naomi lift the smallest boy into her arms. She kissed his temple, then spoke in a tone so gentle it carried everywhere. "Sweetheart," she murmured, eyes never leaving the man on the steps. "Say hello to." The sentence landed without volume and shattered everything. Somewhere, a microphone clinked against wood. A camera operator forgot to breathe. The air changed shape. Adora looked at the child, at Naomi, at the absence of denial. She slid the ring from her finger and set it on the edge of a table with the care you give something you will not be accused of breaking. "You don't need to say anything else," she told Chase. To the room she offered a small, incredulous smile that wasn't unkind, and walked down the aisle, silk and crystal moving like water, bridesmaids scattering in her wake. Doors closed. The choir lowered their heads. Chase stood alone under a canopy meant for two. The mic he had planned to use for vows lay on its side, broadcasting his silence. He looked at Naomi and found no gloating there, no theater, only a woman who had been misnamed and had come, at last, to correct the record without raising her voice. She rose, smoothed the yellow skirt, and inclined her head to the room that had judged her without trial. "I came to prove," she said, plain as bread, "that the curses you put on me never belonged to me." She turned with her boys and walked out. The band, unsure what else to do, let the wedding march trickle on. But it had lost its ceremony and found a different job, to escort pride to its burial. Outside, a silver rain had begun, the kind that blesses rather than ruins. Emmett stepped from the car and opened the door with a quiet that felt like respect. Naomi met his eyes, and he saw in them the weight and the lightness of someone who had lifted a verdict off her own name. "It's done," she said, setting the smallest into his seat, threading her fingers through two other small hands as if braiding rope. Inside, a planner whispered into a headset and found she had no script for what to tell. The band, the florist, the live stream. The cameras blinked with nothing to focus on. The guests stared at one another, each privately inventorying the words they had repeated and the certainty with which they had believed them. On the stage, Chase reached for the fallen mic and thought better of it. There are defeats so complete that even apology would sound like a ploy. Naomi did not look back when the car eased away. Some victories are measured in decibels. Hers was measured in posture. She had not come to win. She had come to stand without bending. And the city, which keeps a ledger of such things, recorded the balance. The city has a way of telling stories faster than anyone can live them. A week after the wedding that wasn't, clips had grown teeth and traveled. The yellow dress, the children's faces. Adora's ring left like a period at the end of a sentence. The groom alone. Share buttons worked their small, tireless doctrine. In boardrooms and barber chairs, people repeated the same 3 beats. He said she was barren. She isn't. 3. The markets do not enjoy moral tales. They punish them. By Wednesday, the company paused 2 contracts, and a polite email used the word reputation like a scalpel. Chase slept on a leather couch and woke to glass light and a room that smelled expensive and unlived in. He sat with a photo album he had not earned the right to keep. He ran a thumb over a younger version of himself and found that arrogance leaves fingerprints on paper. His mother called with a voice made small by regret. "God has taught you what I could not," she said, and he did not defend himself because the last place pride wanted to be was the present. In the late afternoon, he rode an elevator without looking at his reflection and walked into a street-level storefront where steam fogged the glass and a bell announced him plainly. The sign above the door read 3 Hearts Kitchen in hand-painted letters that had already collected a history. Inside, tables were crowded with construction workers, nurses in scrubs, an elderly couple sharing fries as if they were magic in halves. Amara stepped from behind the counter, protective as a lighthouse. "We're busy," she said. "I won't stay long," Chase answered, not lifting his eyes beyond the register. "I came to say I'm sorry." His voice did not audition for sympathy. It stood on its own feet and waited. Naomi appeared from the back with a towel on her shoulder and flour dusting her forearm like a blessing. She looked at him as if turning a page she had already read. "I'm listening," she said. He'd practiced sentences in the elevator. None of them could walk. The only truth that remained was small and entire. "I went to the doctor," he said. "It's me." He swallowed. It was probably me the whole time. Something I never treated. Something I never thought could be mine. He did not cry loudly. He simply reached the point where tears stopped asking permission and did the work grief required. Naomi didn't move to comfort him. She had already wept enough on an altar he had not built. "I cried for you for years," she said when the moment opened. "Now you should cry for yourself and learn what your pride cost." He nodded, a man counting receipts he had once called dividends. "Do you hate me?" he asked, child plain. "No," she said, and the word made space in the room. "If I kept hating you, I'd keep tying us together. I have 3 children who need both my hands free. Forgiveness isn't a favor to you. It's how I cut the rope." He flinched at mercy like it might burn. "Then you've won," he tried. because his language still defaulted to contests. "No one won," she said. "There's surviving, and there's what you do after." She gestured with a small smile toward the sign. "I built something after." And he looked up then and read the name as if hearing it out loud for the first time. 3 hearts. His mouth shaped a broken smile at the accuracy he hadn't earned. Outside the window, a bus ground to its stop and exhaled. Life moved with or without the redeemed. He left without asking for another chance, without reaching for a hand that wasn't his to touch. On the sidewalk, he paused beneath the painted letters and let the syllables sit on his tongue like medicine you don't love but take anyway. He put his phone in his pocket and walked into the democratic anonymity of a crowd. Inside, Naomi stood for a moment with her palms on the counter, feeling the hum of the refrigerator and the rise and fall of voices that had come to trust her seasoning. Emmett slid beside her, his hand finding her shoulder with a certainty that didn't need proof. "Will he be all right?" he asked. "People can learn," she said. "He'll have to work at being ordinary. That's the hardest kind of work if you've never tried it." Evening folded itself around the shop. The last rush came and went, leaving crumbs and praise. Amara turned the sign to closed and put on music that made the floor remember dancing. In the back, 3 small sleepers reset the room's gravity. Naomi washed her hands and sat with a pen and a blank page. She wrote to her sons, not as a moralist but as a witness. "One day you will hear the story of a word that almost became our name. People will say it like a fact. They will be wrong. No one gets to define your worth while you are still fighting to become yourselves. The day I stood without speaking in a room that wanted me to kneel, I wore a crown no one saw. It was made of quiet." She signed their names, then hers, and tucked the letter into a book on a shelf where they would reach for it when they were tall enough. Emmett turned off the front lights. The city went on roaring and glittering and forgetting. In a small house not far away, 3 heartbeats kept their time, steady and sovereign. And inside each beat lived the echo of a woman who had returned her name to herself and stepped into the kind of silence that doesn't hide its reins. Life has a funny way of coming full circle, doesn't it? Somehow, even after the hardest nights, the morning still shows up. If this story made you feel a little less alone, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Is it quiet, raining, or warm with sunlight? Drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing these small, honest pieces of life together.